Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Uday Bhaskar. This week, we review the US missile attack on Syria that took place on April the 7th. US President Donald Trump, in his first quote-unquote decisive military action, authorized the launch of Tomahawk cruise missiles against a Syrian airbase that was alleged to have been used by the Assad regime in a chemical weapons attack against Syrian rebels. Both Syria and Russia have rejected this allegation, and absent an investigation by an independent and credible body, the narrative about what exactly transpired remains opaque. The US missile strike has, however, triggered a number of responses. Domestically, it has helped to burnish the Trump image, and even his more severe critics are now applauding the presidential confidence that Mr. Trump had displayed in his first such authorization of US military power. The subtext in Washington seems to be, move over Obama, here is the decisive Trump. But other strands are more worrisome. Russia has castigated the US for its unilateral military action, and Moscow observed rather unambiguously that both sides are a step away from war. Is the US now going to pursue a clear political objective apropos Syria with the military muscle it has demonstrated? Is this a change of stance by Mr. Trump apropos West Asia? Was there a signal to President Xi Jinping and China, considering that the US missile strike took place when the much anticipated Trump-Xi meeting was taking place in Florida? And what does this mean for US allies such as the European Union and Japan, and for countries like India that have a robust partnership with the United States? To discuss this entire spectrum of issues, we have an eminent panel. Allow me to welcome and introduce General Atta Hasnain, a former GOC of the 15 Corps, Ms. Suhasini Haidar, diplomatic editor at The Hindu, and Mr. Zorawar Daulat Singh, a fellow at the Center for Policy Research. Let me turn to you first, General Atta Hasnain. This whole question of chemical weapons in Syria, there was a similar kind of report in 2013. Now we are in 2017. This outrage, both by the US and the rest of the global community, could you help our viewers to understand this?
Firstly, sir, I think it needs to be put out to the viewers that chemical weapons are just another instrument, a tool of war fighting, in the entire spectrum of warfare. And the whole idea behind warfare is to subjugate, destroy your adversary by some means. Now, you can take the example of artillery. Artillery is used, and the effect of artillery is essentially blast. In the case of chemical weapons, it is the gas which is the effective element which, when launched on an objective, it prevents the enemy from being able to survive that objective. So this is the whole concept of tactical and the strategic element of chemical warfare. The first time officially it was used was, I think, 1915 in the Battle of Ypres in the First World War on the Western Front. And thereafter, if we remember, during the 20s, a movement was there to ban the use of chemical weapons. It was considered to be a weapon of mass destruction and an inhuman weapon to be employed in war.
So it is an ethical dimension.
That's right. There's always been an ethical dimension to it. Thereafter 1972 and thereafter 1993. Two more protocols have come ahead. And today I learned that in 2017, approximately 93% of the world's stockpile of chemical weapons has been destroyed. But that 7% which is surviving obviously is in the hands of rogue elements around the world. And monitoring it becomes very, very difficult.
So would it be fair to say that we are talking about this grey area of 7%, some of which appears to have surfaced in Syria?
That's right. Absolutely. It's surfaced in Syria by some clandestine means. It's been transported from different areas. We are not aware of its use anywhere else. The last time I remember the registered use of it was during the Iran-Iraq war. Also, where it was tactically.
As it happens, it was supplied by the United States and the Western allies. But Suhasini, if I can ask you, Syria, it's a tragic war. We are talking about 500,000 people who may have been killed, 5 to 6 million displaced. Chemical weapons came up in 2013 also. Can you just help us to go through the chronology from then to now?
Sure. In 2013, there was a chemical attack on a suburb just outside of Damascus called Ghouta. It was called the Ghouta massacre. And we saw the same sorts of symptoms. Children are particularly affected by this kind of chemical warfare because it basically sucks out the oxygen, your ability to breathe. And it's a really cruel, painful death. At the time, the US had already said, President Obama at the time had said that this would be a red line, that there were certain red lines in the Syrian war after which he would attack. However, Mr. Obama pulled back at the last minute, partly because he felt that there wasn't a sort of domestic support for any kind of an intervention in Syria, partly because the UK in Parliament had refused to let Mr. Cameron join such an intervention, and partly because Russia and other countries worked with the US with this idea that they would dismantle all of Bashar al-Assad's stockpile. In fact, the agency, the OPCW, the UN-based agency that had carried out this removal of the chemical weaponry, actually got the Nobel Peace Prize for this effort. What we're seeing today then is either a complete failure of that process, or what we're seeing is the idea that with one strike, Mr. Trump is trying to say, I have kind of assuaged everyone's conscience over this one strike, but one strike is not a strategy, because just this morning the news has come in that Mr. Trump has in an interview to, I think, to CNBC, said that there will be no intervention in Syria, that troops are not going in to Syria at this time. So really what we're seeing is the reaction to the chemical weaponry. Mr. Trump is trying to say he has done what Mr. Obama did not do. However, he has certainly not done anything near what was expected in 2013.
Zorawar, in the US media, one has seen these references: timid Obama, decisive Trump. But, if you look at this as the correlation between the military initiative, 59 or 60 Tomahawk missiles, what can they do to something like a Syrian air base? Do they degrade it? And what is the political objective? What Suhasini is saying, is there a clear political objective, or is it just domestic sentiment?
Yes, so that's a great question. What was the motivation behind this? Was it just a domestic sort of effort to sort of restore some authority for the White House in a fairly difficult period leading up to this on domestic issues, on the economy? Regarding the choice of the weapons package, I think we sort of have an indication that this is the sort of the most minimal selection that he was offered. There was more expansive. What we're seeing in terms of the effectiveness, it hasn't really been able to degrade the airfield, etc. And the follow-up comments from the Trump administration seem to be sort of finding additional motivations and goals going along the way. So initially it was to deter the chemical weapon convention norm, set a certain norm. It's then shifted to sort of maybe regime change, then it pulled back towards an anti-ISIS. So you have too many contradictory goals playing out. And I think the one argument is that Trump has made some sort of a tacit bargain with the establishment, which has a certain worldview on the Middle East, particularly on Russia and NATO. And so is there a sense that he is sort of restoring the old line, which Obama to some extent kept it contained, but yet allowed it to play out? And if you recall, up till a few weeks ago, the entire basis of Trump's foreign policy was that he's going to restore a détente with both the great powers. And so is that a reversal of this? But the latest statement by Trump now, after all this, is suggesting that this is a one-off strike. There is no forward movement towards regime change. And
ISIS remains the main target. One more thing that has got degraded, as Zara was saying, was the concept of the UN mandate. One of the things I didn't mean to mention is that in 2013, they put a UN inquiry into place in Syria. The UN inquiry came back in the summer of 2014 inconclusive. They were not able to say who was responsible for even that chemical attack. The fact that these strikes happened despite no mention being made at the UN about an inquiry, about evidence or anything else. The only evidence that was shown by the US were the pictures of the children, which we have all seen across television
And I
screens.
think this whole propaganda kind of element as far as Syria is concerned, it is something which we are barely sort of, shall we say, aware of what exactly is happening. But Zorawar, your point, which I want Atha to respond to, is that in terms of the Trump camp and what they are signaling, I thought a very clear signal or one conclusion that has emerged is Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin are not the kind of friends that was made out to be in the early part, because I thought if anything there was a certain anxiety in Washington that Trump is getting too close to Putin, and we had all kinds of allegations. But that apart, Atha, what would you say as far as the impact of the missile strike on the war in Syria? You know, there are other players. It's not just Russia and the United States. There's Iran, there's Turkey, there's the rest of West Asia. So after this, where is this headed?
I think the first effect that we really need to look at is that it seems that everyone has taken the focus off from ISIS, from Daesh, which is fighting for survival, as you're aware, in Mosul and Raqqa and other cities like that. And suddenly you find that they seem to be the good boys of this entire war, and everyone else are the bad boys. So I hope this doesn't happen, and the focus comes back onto the ISIS for the destruction of the ISIS, because they are on their last legs at the moment. Having said that, the Russian presence there. The Russians, if you remember, at one time in 2015, after having come in 6 months later, they announced that they are leaving behind only skeleton forces, some amount of air force, etc. I think this action by the United States may now instigate the Russians to actually look at having a reasonably permanent presence there. As you are aware, this is the first time the Russians have actually come into the Middle East with troops. They are concerned about the Eastern Mediterranean, the port of Latakia, the air base there next to it. This is the only presence that they have actually a footprint or in the Eastern Mediterranean area where they can establish their naval presence. And this is very important for them to hold on to. Lastly, I think as far as Iran is concerned, I think this entire triangle of Iran, Syria, that's Bashar Assad, Syria, and Russia, the strategic space of the Levant, which they wish to occupy, that is an essential element in this. The United States during Obama's time did not challenge this particular domination of the Levant by these three elements. Today it seems with Trump's action, as if for the first time this perception is coming in that the United States wishes to challenge the presence of this triangle in the Levant area. I think you will find possibly in the near future, if you find the Americans becoming a little more, may I say, energetic about it, you may find the possibility, the remote possibility of conflict situations coming closer and closer.
Suhasini, if this does play out in the manner that Atha is suggesting, Russia and the United States, you have a palpable increase in tension, political, military, diplomatic, and so on. Where is China in all of this? You know, for instance, this so-called China, the Xi Jinping and Donald Trump meeting in Florida. Now, there's one school of thought, which I've seen on some of the Chinese blogs, that the whole thing was set up. It was a signal to China and President Xi Jinping that when he's there, the US will carry out a cock-a-snook attack like this. I mean, how do you read this?
Well, certainly, just a few hours ago, we've seen a statement from President Xi. Essentially, he's told Mr. Trump that they have to find a peaceful solution to the problem in North Korea. What that peaceful solution is yet to be spelt out. Look, it's somewhere here in India, there was a slight hope amongst the strategic community that regardless of all the uncertainties around Mr. Trump, that his presidency would essentially mean a closer relationship with Russia, which is in India's interests strategically, and perhaps a distancing from China, which would put China on notice, particularly when it comes to its aggressive posture in this region. I think that hope is now being reversed. And we're seeing instead Mr. Trump carrying out a very pragmatic sort of engagement with President Xi in Florida. And the relationship with Russia does not seem to be going, as you said, according to the expected lines. This is going to have an impact because China doesn't seem to be challenged in any way by all of this, regardless of what happens between Russia and the US over Syria. China has remained, in fact, China almost supported the US strikes by saying, we understand you need to do things when there are such huge humanitarian atrocities carried out. But I think what we are going to see much more from India's perspective is a focus on where this balance is going to go. As long as the US is able to contain its relations, as Zorawar said, with both the world powers, if you like, India has a certain amount of space to carry out its own policy. At this particular moment, India will feel a little more hemmed in.
But Zorawar, as an esteemed member of the strategic community that Suhasini was referring to, what we have seen over the last year plus, unilateral military action by the major powers. Russia exercised this option a couple of years ago. We've seen China in relation to the South China Sea. Now it's the United States and Syria, ostensibly humanitarian. How do you read this relationship between these three major powers, as it were, which is Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and the space for India that Suhasini is referring to?
So this triangle has been actually the dominant feature of international politics for the last 30, certainly since the 70s, late 60s. The old strategy, US strategy, was to sort of pull the Chinese away from this Eurasian camp. What we're seeing is Trump actually came with an alternative idea, which some say was partly influenced by Kissinger or others, that let's try and again split these up, but this time focusing on the engagement with the Russians. So it was actually quite an astute strategy where you open up, or at least sort of stabilize this sort of deteriorating relationship with the Russians, and thereby gain some leverage on the Chinese, who sort of were benefiting from this sort of Russia-centric geostrategy. But what we're seeing is the old establishment has pushed back on the line, where it's the Chinese who somehow, yes, they pose a long-term challenge, but we have such extraordinary interdependent ties with them. We have $600 billion of trade. We have massive amounts of investment flows. This is something where we can work with them. I think this is the dominant theme that's coming out from this summit as well with Xi Jinping, where I think the Americans deliberately tried to portray these two contrasting images, US-Russia relationship, the US-China relationship. And yes, there may be a situation where some are saying that this will give leverage on the Chinese. But I think the world has changed now. The Chinese are not going to sort of just huddle their way back and forth. And so there is...
So the reduction you're sort of pointing towards seems to be like a return to the Cold War, where Washington, at least one part of Washington, wants to contain Moscow. Would that be the way you're reading it?
I think they are exaggerating the American establishment, or the dominant belief still is living in a world which no longer exists. They feel that they can manage both these rising power centers.
So make believe in Washington. Anyway, I won't put words into your mouth.
The real Washington needs to stand up. Okay, the first 100 days of the Trump administration are just getting done. But even so, we've seen every kind of statement made. Mr. Tillerson said ISIS remains the priority. Miss Nikki Haley said the opposite and said that pushing Assad out and regime change remained a priority. We've heard the US say that they are going into Syria with the purpose of punishing Assad. Then we hear that this is just a one-off.
So maybe in the second 100 days. But Atta, can I bring you in quickly on one last issue, which is we started with chemical weapons. Now there is anxiety about the access to chemical weapons, getting them, the non-state entity, and their possible use in a certain theater. How would you frame South Asia? Because we have our own concerns about the non-state entity, the role of Pakistan, and this whole question of the 7% that we spoke about.
The fact remains that we live in South Asia in a very turbulent environment. And it is not a question of just conventional threats that we are looking at. We are looking at a lot of unconventional threats, irregular threats. That in fact forms the main element of the threats within South Asia. And having said that, therefore, we should be always concerned about rogue elements. And what we are seeing in Jammu and Kashmir, what we are seeing in the rest of India, in terms of Pakistan's attempts here, this is something which should concern all strategic thinkers. The fact that both nations are signatories to the Chemical Weapons Convention, that doesn't take us away from anything from the fact that in this kind of an environment, it is more the rogue elements which play a role. As you're seeing in the kind of hybrid warfare which is going on between India and Pakistan over Jammu and Kashmir or other issues at the moment, rules are set apart. And therefore, there are deniable things. And Pakistan is, as we are all aware, is a champion of denial. So we cannot put this, we cannot deny this fact that chemical weapons can very well form a part of the rogue elements, the elements which Pakistan supports as friendly terrorists. And this is something which is not the concern of India alone. It should be the concern of the rest of the world. Because it's not as if chemical weapons leak into an area and will remain isolated in that area. If they leak into an area, it is always the possibility of their spreading through networks. And networks today, as you are aware, land boundaries or sea boundaries or maritime boundaries are hardly boundaries for the prevention of movement of these kind of weapons and
so we
things.
Have to keep an eye on this. Do you want to say something, Suhasini, on this?
Only that I think the world has to understand that every day that they bicker amongst themselves, amongst these large powers, you're essentially taking a day away from that fight against ISIS and allowing ISIS, which is already a degraded force, to perhaps disintegrate, which will be much more dangerous. So I do agree with General Hasnain that we need to find some way of collecting ourselves on this instead of it being US versus Russia. The only reason why we're at a point where we can say ISIS is in retreat is because for the past years, certainly since the Paris attacks, we've seen a certain cohesion in the attack on ISIS. If that is now affected, and it looks like it has been affected after this strike, then the only gainer really is ISIS.
But on this, Zorawar, while we keep saying that the ISIS is on the ropes and they are being pushed back in Syria, in the last 6 months we've seen a series of terror attacks where directly or otherwise the linkage is with the ideology of the Islamic State, even if it is not directly involved. I mean, Russia itself had an incident and we've seen a series of them. So the whole challenge of the Islamic State and its ideology, the linkage with Syria, where is the world headed on this?
So I still don't believe that this is going to be a unified struggle against ISIS. I think the United States wants to re-enter the region, wants to regain some leverage. The east of the Euphrates is an area where they believe can be a future safe zone and potential remnants of a Sunni state. I think that they haven't abandoned that strategy. Will they go into a headlong clash with the Russians? I don't think so at this stage.
We have to perhaps watch in the next 100 days. But at the end of the day, the US missile attack on Syria has reopened Pandora's box in a geopolitical and geostrategic sense against the backdrop of globalization, the rise of both non-state entities and a virulent Islamist ideology, as also a new American president whose flair for the unexpected causes considerable disquiet. The tragic and unending war in Syria apart, the visible tension between the United States and Russia over the future of the Assad regime is disturbing. One deeply embedded 21st century institutional inadequacy is the increasing irrelevance of the United Nations Security Council, the so-called Big Five, in managing global affairs in an equitable and consensual manner. This has been more than evident in relation to Syria and West Asia over the last decade plus. Chemical weapons and the larger challenge of WMD, or weapons of mass destruction, is to my mind illustrative of the largest post-Hiroshima-Nagasaki failing of global leadership at a time when objective and ethical vision was called for in managing the nuclear genie. A self-serving framework was invoked and deviously imposed on a gullible collective. In the early 21st century, stunned as it was by the enormity of 9/11, the United States made some impulsive and ill-advised choices. And the Colin Powell presentation to the United Nations Security Council in February 2003 about Iraq and its alleged weapons of mass destruction arsenal diluted the integrity and rectitude of the sole superpower in an irreparable manner. Syria is the classic example wherein every narrative about the use of chemical weapons is suspect and there is no credible international body to whom this task can be entrusted with the conviction that the truth will be ascertained based on unalloyed facts. The inability to deal with Syria also draws attention to the potential challenge that is simmering in North Korea, and here the US-China relationship will be tested for its resilience and perspicacity. The next few months are likely to be fraught with many uncertainties and convulsions apropos regional security. New Delhi will have to monitor these events for their non-linear linkages with India's comprehensive national security. On that note, allow me to thank my guests, General Hasnain, Ms. Haider, and Mr. Zorawar Daulat Singh. And thank you for watching Security Scan. Goodbye.